And this is the second of our workshops as we're kind of wrapping up this career pathways initiative project here. Elizabeth, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to offer just kind of a quick overview of some of that?
Yes, I'm appreciative to the CPI grant. It's actually mainly run out of career services, but it had this curricular component where it had 8 competencies that were identified by employers as really important, and this really came out of the fact that we push graduate school and medical school or dental, whatever the next thing is, but so many of our students go into straight from college into the workforce, and so it's really being sure we had those skills. And when those skills came out, there were things that many of us value in our courses no matter what: critical thinking, teamwork and collaboration, a global perspective. There were things that were important to us anyway, but to kind of hone in on them and think about them and incorporate them as specific learning objectives, the CPI grant has given us time to do that. So we're in the last year of it. This is the last cohort that just went through this, and so I'm grateful that we will now start asking CPI participants to share their knowledge with us so we can learn from them.
Great, thank you. And so to wrap up today, what we're going to be talking about is how a couple of us incorporated this idea of collaboration, but collaboration in kind of a long-term or large-scale projects in a couple of our classes. A while back, we had a workshop talking about kind of really focusing on collaboration in the small group kind of class, individual class kind of settings, and the value of that as a learning outcome. This time we're going to talk about doing this on, like I said, on a large scale, almost on at least in my case, in kind of like a semester-long project that the students worked on. And so we're going to hear from a little bit from me in a little bit, and then also from Dr. Joseph Drexler-Dreiss from the theology department to talk about how he incorporated this into one of his classes. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. And I think probably what we'll do is we'll both talk about ours a little bit, and then we'll just kind of take some questions. Because with the last workshop we did like this, the last panel, we kind of did the same thing, an overview of how we use this in our courses, and then just kind of a conversation with everybody about kind of different ways we can do this or things we might do differently in the future or what we got out of it as well. So. I think with that, I'll see if Joe, you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about how you incorporated some of this into your teaching.
Sure. How long do you want me to talk for?
As long as you want to.
Okay. I'll try to be brief then. I'm skeptical about group projects. I always have been skeptical about group projects, largely because I didn't like them as a student. It just, yeah. So I've never used them in my teaching. So I think that I've thought for a while that on the one hand, they take up valuable course time. So especially with theology, students are now taking one theology class. So there's a lot of content that I feel like I need to get through. Students, I find, are largely not accustomed to writing argumentative papers. So we have to work with them on this. And it just leaves a little time for other things. So that's one holdup I've had. And then there seems to be just this pattern where a lot of times group work, at least as I thought, kind of devolves into a couple people doing all the work and then getting really annoyed. So I took this course over the winter through the grant on teaching 21st century skills, which convinced me that the benefits of group work warranted me trying to use it in a better way than I imagined it. So one benefit that convinced me of this was just the pedagogical benefit. So I think in the course I'm teaching this semester, it's called Christianity and Racial Capitalism. It's largely problem-based. So I'm asking students to understand racial capitalism and identify examples of it in their context. And then second, respond to racial capitalism. Come up with a response to racial capitalism that makes sense, and do so in conversation with how, especially theologians, have responded to racial capitalism. So I think in problem-based courses, group work has more potential than in other types of courses. So I think pedagogically, there are reasons to do it. And then also because it's a skill. So it's what Dr. Hammer called an employable skill, and what our course called an employable skill. So I think there were 4 skills, employable skills in the 21st century that we focus on. Teamwork was one of them. So I do have a problem with this way of thinking because it can turn education into something that's purely functional and subservient to the need to produce something within capitalism. But at the same time, students are taking out a loan to take this course, so they should be getting skills that they can use to pay back those loans. So we talk about this in class and kind of the tension and how I see this tension and how students see this tension. And I found that this actually has been a way to get students on board with actually just trying out different things in team settings because it's important to what they'll be doing beyond Xavier. So I describe this as kind of a low stakes environment where they can try different roles without much consequence in ways that can help them to then take on those roles in more consequential or high stakes settings in the future. So having this conversation with students about the skill of teamwork has been a way to get, especially the students who are skeptical of group projects, on board early on. Okay, so the specific project that I've assigned this semester, ask students to, within a group, develop a response to racial capitalism that works toward what our mission statement refers to as the promotion of a more just and humane society. So we've read a lot of authors who have defined and identified what they've called racial capitalism in different ways. And then we've read a group of authors, both theological and non-theological, who have responded to racial capitalism in different and in many cases conflicting ways. All right, so the group project has 2 distinct parts. Part 1, which was due a couple weeks ago, asked them to identify a specific problem in their present day context, describe how that is part of a larger structure of racial capitalism, and name one response. So many of the groups actually described problems in the healthcare industry because many of the students are majoring in that area. The second part, which we're working on now, is for them to argue for the potentials and limitations of that response. So they have to turn in these parts separately, and I found this to be helpful because it's allowed me to identify some problems before they started part 2. So they can either submit this as a 10-minute video or a 1500 to 2,000 word essay. All groups chose the essay, surprisingly to me, but yeah. So everyone's writing essays.
That surprises me too. I don't mean to interrupt you, but that surprises me too. I would have thought,
Yeah, and that was despite, once I saw everyone was going the essay route, despite my little encouragements to do something more creative. But yes.
All right.
So we meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So the process of this has been that every Friday they spend I give them about 20 minutes to accomplish some specific task. And that task is typically content-based. So I'll say, today, by the end of these 20 minutes, you'll need to have categorized your response using the typology of X author we've been reading. At times, it's process-based. So I ask students to spend 10 minutes identifying the role that they've taken on so far in the group. articulating that role to the group and getting feedback on how they can perform better in that role. So I think initially I thought that giving them specific tasks would be helpful to kind of like keep them going in the project. I found that it's actually made groups slow down in good ways. So groups have, I think, tended toward like, we need to just write and keep on writing. And the specific tasks, I think, have forced them to like stop and have conversation and debate, which has been surprising to me, but also helpful. So I had planned some of the tasks in advance, largely based on things I learned in that CPI course, like identifying roles. But many of them have come up just as I've worked through this for the first time, and I've seen some of the difficulties in groups and trying to think of things that can address those difficulties. I've also incorporated informal presentations. So these are low stakes, they're ungraded, but I'll ask groups, can you give a 5-minute presentation on this specific thing? And the rest of the class will be focused on critiquing. So saying what the group is missing, or where their argument is strong, where it has gaps. And this has been helpful, I think, for some of the groups who are struggling a bit to see where other groups are and to emulate that. And then also for groups to get feedback. Along with these Friday sessions, most days that we have class, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'll mention something about the group project. This often is in the form of saying, we're reading a particular text, and I'll point out every once in a while, do you see how this author is doing this really well? This is something that I'm asking you to do in your group projects. And then evaluation. So there's an individual component for the group project based on a peer assessment, and then a bit on my observation. So like if students aren't present for most of the times that we're doing, or for much of the times that we're doing the group work, I take that into account. So 2/5 of the grade is individual, largely based on peer assessment. 3/5 of the grade is based on the final product, so it's a common grade. And then there's a separate grade for part 1 and for part 2. So I grade that according to a rubric. So as we've wrapped up part 1 and moving into part 2, I have noticed some difficulties. One difficulty is simply attendance. So Friday afternoon, I think there's 22 students in both sections. Sometimes there'll be like 15 people in class. Especially when it rains is another problem. So having like a third of the class missing has just been difficult to navigate with the group projects. There's a small handful of students, fewer than I anticipated, but who haven't been pulling their weight, so to speak. And then I found that some groups are just more comfortable like sitting with each other, but just communicating on a Google Doc. So they'll sit with each other for 10 minutes and not talk, but be writing with each other. So just getting them to get off the Google Doc and start talking has been a challenge sometimes. The most positive parts, I found that the students who have come to me with difficulties, some of those difficulties are like group member X isn't doing anything, or I can't get involved because I don't know how I should contribute, have actually grown a lot. So students who do a lot of work and have said like, this student isn't pulling their weight, I've worked with on how to be a leader and actually encourage those students to find a ways in, and to try to help those students to get involved. And that's worked really well. Students who come to me because they feel like they don't know how to contribute, finding kind of easier ways they can begin to contribute that can then lead to more substantial contributions, has worked quite well. I've also found that the ideas that have come out of the group projects have generally been stronger than the ideas that have come out of the position papers that students are writing on their own. And then the last thing I'll say, having everyone in the class working on a common project has ended up kind of structuring our discussions in some way. So all the students have this sort of end goal in mind, and they actually know what other groups are doing. So when reading text, many of our discussions will move toward, well, you know, Cornell West seems like he is offering this response to our final project. He's doing that in these ways. I think he's not doing it well here. He's doing it well there. So that's something that I didn't anticipate, but it's these group projects have, I think, been a way of kind of bonding together our larger group discussions, even when we're not working on the group project. So in sum, I'm happy that I'm trying something that I was skeptical of. I think there are some things I certainly do differently next time around, but I'll continue, I think, to do group projects in some of my more problem-based courses.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think like you, I was always a little skeptical of group work as well, because again, I didn't like doing it in college myself, and then when I started doing it as a faculty member in my classes, it just devolved into kind of busy work and a lot of wasted time. But I think going through that 21st century skills class really kind of helped me think about it as a learning skill that I can be trying to teach them through the class, as opposed to just a way of getting some work done. I kind of had a similar issue I wanted to address with my class with this, which was this idea of a problem and having the students work together kind of to consider responses to the problem. So I was teaching last spring, this for the first time, this dystopias class for X-Core 3010. And the idea behind the class was that we would take a look at fictional and cinematic dystopias, right? These kind of extreme examples, and then extrapolate from them the more specific ways that society can be dystopian, right? Some of the elements of those dystopias, and then try to think about how we see those in contemporary society today in the United States or in other countries. So like the real clear example, we read 1984, because you can't really talk about dystopias without taking a look at 1984, right? And we talk about the surveillance state that exists in that book. And then we would talk about how that is present or becoming present in our lives or in contemporary society today, right? And we can talk about kind of responses to it and the extreme ends of it in the fictional version versus the realistic version. So that was kind of the overall gist of the class, right? And I wanted them to be working on this both within our class discussions, but also to be doing some work on their own. And so I set up this kind of semester-long group project of a podcast, right? So we'd have a class podcast where each of these groups would put together one episode that does essentially that. They took a look at one, or in some cases two, because they asked to, two fictional or cinematic dystopias and analyzed them in the way we were doing it in class, right? So that they could demonstrate as a group that they were able to do the work on their own and work together to do it, right? So my real concern going in was this long-term team-based project, right? Which is that if I put them into these groups in the third week of the semester, right, how well is that going to work by the end of the semester? But again, I think because I really kind of focused on it as a learning process, you're learning how to work together as a group, and you're having specific roles, right? You're having specific responsibilities. It worked out pretty well. Now, all my results so far were pretty disruptive because it was last spring, right? And so 6 weeks into the semester, we all dispersed and went all around the country and spent the rest of the semester online. I think in some ways that kind of worked a little bit better because they had this connection that they had already established in class, right? And then they were able to continue it remotely outside of class. So, that was kind of my big challenge and concern. I was just going to show you all a little bit of what they ended up producing. And again, I'll kind of remind you, they did this during the kind of the actual like lockdown. So this is the kind of website I was using for the course. You can see we also had kind of a collaborative music playlist that they all kind of added dystopian themed songs to. Here's the actual assignment that I gave them, and if anybody ever wants to take a look at this, you can kind of see it. I really broke it down. You can see how long it was that we started at the end of January, right? Of creating these groups and figuring out these topics, and then they worked throughout the semester on this. So this wasn't here's the assignment and turn it in at the end of the semester. It was kind of like Joe was saying, it was this ongoing process that they kept working through, and I think that's really important to this process and to the learning as well. It can't be here's the assignment and let me see what you all come up with at the end of the semester. It's got to be this very kind of staged and multi-step and kind of constant back and forth process that they go through. And then this is the actual podcast that we ended up putting together. So we had, I think by the end, where did it go? I think we ended up with like 8 episodes or 9 episodes. They were in groups of about 3 people each, right? They first came together. They selected a dystopia or a fictional or cinematic dystopia. They all ended up doing movies, which I think was probably fine in the end, especially with the lockdown. It probably just eased the demands a little bit. But they had to script the podcast. They had to work together to record the podcast. And again, they had to do this from across the country. They had to put together resources. They had to put together a references list. They had to do the editing. They had to do sound effects as well. So, and again, kind of like, I think like Joe was saying, often putting them together in those groups, one of the surprising advantages was, I think, the creativity that ensued as a result of it, right? I had a list of possible things, books and movies they could take a look at that I had put together and kind of said, you don't have to choose from these lists, but these are kind of your starting point, right? But if you want to do something different, ask me and you can do it, right? And so I had never thought about the animated film series, The Incredibles, as a possibility, but one of the groups kind of came together and said, we want to do this, right? And this is about the world, the superheroes, and it's a world in which the superheroes aren't allowed to use their superpowers. They've been outlawed, right? And so they made an argument as a group. They said, we really want to do this, right? And here's how we think this is a dystopia that we can learn from. And so they did a great job. Starting really from scratch, again, working as a group, right? One person had the original idea, but then they kind of evolved it as they went forward, and they did a great job with it. So I think if I've got the audio right, I'm just going to play a quick little clip here.
To this day, the world is still a dystopia.
Hello, everybody. It's Katie.
Sunjay.
Sakana.
And you are listening to the Dystopian Detectives.
So, and again, it was about a 10-minute, they had to do a 10-minute episode on this. But again, you can hear them doing this. Again, like I said, they were across the country working on this. So I had to make some exceptions to the expectations because I realized that was going to be kind of an extra challenge. But it really ended up working out really nicely in terms of, like I said, the long-term process, I didn't have any groups that fell apart, and that was always my big concern with any kind of group project that I've done in the past, which is that at least one of the groups turns into a complete disaster where like one person is doing all the work. Or I once did a small group project several years ago in a class where it was a group with two friends in it, and by halfway through the semester they were mortal enemies, according to one of them, right? And so again, the group itself just kind of fell apart. But this worked out really well. We were really careful about saying everybody needs a role, everybody needs responsibilities, and then I also did build in some checks, and I think Joe was talking about a little bit about this, kind of evaluating each other. And so I think over the course of those really kind of 2 months that they were doing the work, I think I had 3 checks where they had to report on each member of the group as well as themselves, and evaluate how well they were contributing to the group, right? And then they got a grade based on that. And I was able to kind of catch early on that a couple of students were not contributing, and then I kind of pulled them aside and talked about what was at issue, and we got them kind of back on track. And so it worked out pretty well. The one downside is, as we've all kind of had to deal with over the past year, is that I had, I think, 2 students at different points in the semester who were out for 2 weeks because they had coronavirus, and so we had to kind of work around that. But in terms of the groups actually kind of working as a whole, it came together really well. I was surprised. I didn't have any complaints in my evaluations at the end of the semester about being in these groups, which I kind of assumed there would be some, oh, I hate group work, and oh, I hate having my grade affected by other people. But they all seem to really kind of buy into it, and I think it was because of so much structure imposed on it. So that's kind of what I did, and I think it worked out really well. And Joe, one question I was going to ask you is, you said on Fridays they're often kind of working together in the groups in class. When you're doing kind of more of the regular class stuff on, say, Mondays and Wednesdays, are the groups a factor at all, or is it just they're a class and they're
I don't know that the groups as such are a factor, but the content of the group project is. So I kind of do like a mixture of lecture and discussion, or lecture interspersed with discussion, something like that. So oftentimes the discussion will be like, well, our group found this. So the discussion will move into like a certain group trying to make a point. But I won't put them in groups. So I won't say like, we won't do like a pair share or something in groups. Maybe that would be a good idea though.
That's something I was trying to decide, like how much to push the groups. Like, should it be, because I think, and I wish we had somebody from pharmacy here to talk about this, because I know for at least, some of their classes, the whole class is built around this idea of team-based learning, where throughout the semester, they're always working with the same small group of people. Elizabeth, do you know any details about kind of how they're doing that in pharmacy?
It's because, but I don't have details to really share. I know that though it's required, it's part of now them prepping them for the NAPLEX, and it's very, very structured, very, and with not a lot of options that students have. Like I think in both of your examples, there were a lot of options, at least with the topics they could pick or the movies they could pick and the directions they could go. And I'm thinking that the pharmacy ones, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm thinking there's just a lot. It's not just the structure that's so important pedagogically, like you all are talking about, but there's just a lot of structure in the outcomes and the content as well. But I mean, it's every class. Like they teach the class that way.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've been trying to wonder if I shouldn't take it to that level. I'm kind of thinking I shouldn't. Maybe that's too much structure, right? To always have them with the same 2 or 3 people, every class meeting, every discussion we have, every little thing we do in class. I think that might be a little too much.
Yeah, I think there's probably a happy medium you can balance there, where I really love the idea of and Joe, earlier you had said, okay, on Fridays you gave them these tasks, and so I love the idea of having more structure and creating that kind of space, but structured space for students. But then I think if it's going to be just like you were saying, a regular think, pair, share, or a regular discussion, then letting them get with whoever they want, having that blend would be important. So, Joe, thank you for sharing that website. That is so handy, and I've bookmarked it. Did you, and I guess I would ask both of you, did you assign your groups, assign them? Or did you let students kind of have some choice?
Like who was in them?
Yeah.
I did, although I asked students, so we started this in the second week, and I said, if you want to be with anyone, email me, and I'll most likely honor that, unless, everyone wants to be with a certain person. So I honored, I think, everyone who emailed me saying they wanted to be with someone.
And did most people email you, or was it just a handful?
No,
or
I'd say a few people in each class.
Probably who'd lived together or something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember now. It was so long ago, a whole year. I think I created the groups, and I think I used some early work, because like I said, that we started the groups in late January. And so I think I used some of the work they did during those first 3 weeks to try to identify and be a little manipulative in terms of, this student seems to be really on ball, and maybe this student's a little, to make sure that like each group had kind of a diversity of engagement from what I saw during those first 3 weeks, although it was obviously kind of a cursory assessment. But I think I was a little manipulative. I think they ended up working out really well. And like I said, I didn't have any kind of these kind of drama crises that I was worried about having. Maybe again, because they were all in lockdown, that might have helped too. I don't know.
Well, I think that's a benefit of having some class time where they can do the work too, and kind of being there to support them. And yeah. And I was scrolling when you asked that question. I was scrolling through the rest of the podcast, Jay. That's just I know you'd already told me about this. That's just so cool, though.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, like I said, I had to make some accommodations. And sorry, I don't know what's going on with my camera, getting out of focus. I had to make some accommodations because we went into lockdown, and just as we were kind of really kind of kicking the project itself into gear, right, like the main part of the project into gear. And so I had to make some adjustments to my expectations, because I just kind of knew we were all gonna need to kind of pull back a little bit. So I cut down like the length of it. I let them all kind of do movies, even though I really had kind of gone into this saying, no, if that's a little too easy, they should incorporate some literature into it as well. So, yeah, it came out pretty nice.
The Stepford Wives. How did they even know about that movie?
It was a remake. They did a remake in the early 2000s. Yeah. So, but it was good because the groups worked out pretty well, where they kind of fed off of each other. So there wasn't a lot of slacking. So they went back and actually looked at the original as well as the new one, and kind of made some comparisons to the 1974, I think, version or so, and the 2004 version, and talked about how different they were in terms of what the message that was being kind of conveyed. So I tried to get him to read the book too, but again, it was more than I could ask for.
So did both of you feel like you hit the mark on the actual CPI goal? Like, you're talking a lot about hitting the mark on the content, I think, from your classes, right? Getting them to think about the content in your classes. What about the goal of the CPI goal of working in teams?
I think I eventually did. I think it was a bit rough in the beginning. So I didn't give them tasks. I told them, I gave them examples of tasks. But I said, grow into some identifiable task. And that took longer than I expected. And and I think there were some benefits of that. Like there was one student who just could not deal with his group. He just really disagreed with the other three members of his group, and he finally identified his task as he called it the contrarian. It was actually after he did that, it became much easier for him and his group, because he talked about how that was actually an important task because he listens really well. He points out the other side, and I think that helped him kind of see where he fit, and also helped his group members see what he brought to the group. But yeah, it was for some people it was a struggle to get to an identifiable role. So I think I'd probably rethink how I do that next time around, and maybe have it a bit more streamlined from the beginning.
Yeah, I think I did too. It's really hard though, or at least I still haven't found a good way to really measure. Like, yes, they learned how to be better team players and how to work better with other people, right? I mean, like I said, we can look at the content and say, yeah, y'all managed to pull this together and you did a great job. But does that actually mean that they became more compatible as people who work in a team, or did something else happen? So I haven't quite figured out how to really measure the effectiveness of something like that.
Yeah, and for me, the peer assessments on a theoretical level work, but I found that like half of the peer assessments, they just said everyone was A level in everything, including themselves. So there were some that were really honest, and I think, and I made them actually tell their group, I think I'm here right now at several times during the semester, and these are the two things I'm going to do to kind of move into better places on the rubric. But yeah, I mean, like there was one group who didn't have a great final project, and everyone ranked everybody as, A or B level. So yeah, I don't know how you measure that when a lot of the work is done, outside of class, and you can't see what's going on.
Yeah. I that's interesting though. My guess is if that group that was squirrely had been solid, but it only had a few squirrely members, they would have said it. But I also think that the example you gave of the student who finally found the role, like again, that's something that you can't really assess on a scale or rubric, but I bet that's a lesson that, that he can take next time he gets in an uncomfortable group and intuit it. I don't know. It's interesting.
Mine were surprisingly honest with the self-assessments. I was just kind of going back and taking a look, and I set it up. I used a kind of a group assessment that I found online. And so it asks them just 5 questions about for each person. They had to do an assessment for each person in their group. So it's participation in developing ideas and planning, willingness to discuss the ideas of others, cooperation with other group members, interest and enthusiasm in the project, and participation in leading or participating in the project completion. And for each, it was little effort, insufficient, sufficient, very strong, or excellent. And they were surprisingly honest, and they had to do themselves as well, right? So they had to give themselves a self-evaluation, self-assessment. So sometimes I would get these ones where like everybody in the group was giving one person a C, and then that person was giving themselves an A. We could talk a little bit, but sometimes they were honest and say, I just kind of blew it over the last couple of weeks. I've been slacking off, and I need to do a better job.
Would you share that with us? You have that rubric? I would love to have that rubric now.
I can. It's just in a quiz in Brightspace. If you all want to hear about how I created like 87 individual quizzes for them to assess it, it was a little too much. But I can send it around in a kind of a readable format.
If you could do that, or just send us to the website, that would be great.
Yeah. Because I set it up in a way that like there was a quiz for each student that each person had to do. So it got a little chaotic.
I couldn't figure this out, so I just gave everyone a hard copy, and they returned their hard copy to me.
I this semester have been because we've been doing, I'm teaching next core class, and so they in pairs present every single class period. A pair presents, and then they've got their group project, their group presentation at the end, and they present on the readings every day. And so part of it is I have a rubric that I have the students fill out, the student participants, because mine's remote and I want them to pay attention. And so mine is I email them the Word document, and they email me the Word document back every time. So but I started midway. I'll do it via Brightspace next time. Probably not as a quiz, but anyway.
Yeah, I will put that together and have Carla send it around to everybody when she sends out like the evaluation. Because, and like I said, I'll see if I can find the original source, because I got it from somebody else's website about evaluating group work.
Thank you so much.
It seemed to work out pretty well, though. I was pretty happy with it. I think we're about at the top of the hour, and I know some of us, including me, have class at 1:15. So see if maybe there's any last questions we can answer about this, or if there's any kind of last thoughts about this CPI project as well. This is kind of the end of the cycle, though, Elizabeth. Is that right?
This is the end of the CPI granting cycle. So yeah, really, you don't need to have any questions about that. However, we will in CAT be doing some CPI workshops, themed workshops like this earlier in the semester next time, because this was good stuff and people need to hear this. So we will be doing that. So CPI folks, I'll be in touch. Thanks.
Great.
And Jay, I do have a quick question for you. But we can wait till the recording's done.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll say thank you to my co-presenter, Dr. Joseph Drexler-Dreiss from the Theology Department, and I'll thank everybody for attending today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And Joe, yes, thanks everybody. Thanks presenters. Excellent job. Such good stuff.